All right, so we're diving into Bitcoin for disaster relief.
Okay.
Um, Specifically, I mean, we saw those issues with FEMA after Hurricane Helen.
Right.
10 states, man, they got hammered. North Carolina especially. We're talking like homes just gone, no power, people
Yeah.
desperate.
Yeah.
And that's where this video, Bitcoin is the answer to FEMA's corruption. Here's why. That's kind of what caught your eye, right?
Yeah, and I think for good reason. The video, it really doesn't hold back when it comes to FEMA's response.
Yeah, dropping the ball feels like, I don't know, a little bit of an understatement.
Yeah.
They're getting slammed for, like, allegedly blocking aid, mismanaging funds. What happened?
So they get into this example with Elon Musk and Starlink.
Okay.
So after the hurricane, Musk offered Starlink terminals to try to get communication back up and running.
Which is, like, essential.
Absolutely. I mean, after a crisis like that, communication is key. But the video, it claims that FEMA actually, like, hindered those efforts.
Wow.
And then on top of that, you have that whole debacle from a few years back, you remember. FEMA losing track of that $1.4 billion.
Wait, losing track? That's a wild amount of money.
Right. And to add insult to injury, the video says that a lot of these Hurricane Helen victims, they only got like $750 each to rebuild their lives.
It's honestly heartbreaking. You would hope in those situations it'd be fast, it'd be effective.
Yeah.
And this video is saying Bitcoin could be the answer. It could cut through bureaucracy, minimize corruption, get that aid directly to the people who need it.
Exactly.
But how? I'm not going to lie, when I think disaster relief, Bitcoin's on the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, it seems like a bit of a leap, but the video, it makes a compelling case. So you see FEMA, it's centralized, one central authority calling the shots. Bitcoin, on the other hand, it's decentralized. It runs on this global network, no single entity in control.
So instead of going through this big institution, which, as we've seen, can be slow, inefficient, even corrupt, you're saying Bitcoin allows those direct transfers.
Exactly, like cutting out the middleman.
Okay.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The video, it draws this parallel to the Canadian trucker protests a while back.
Vaguely, I remember that whole thing.
Right. Well, the thing is, even when those traditional financial systems were basically shut down, restricted, Bitcoin allowed people to access their funds.
So in a chaotic situation like a hurricane where getting to a bank might be impossible, Bitcoin could be like a lifeline.
Exactly. And it's not even just about access. It's about giving individuals and communities control instead of relying on a system that, let's face it, might not always have their best interests at heart.
That's a big statement.
It is.
We're talking about two totally different approaches. FEMA, with all its bureaucracy, its procedures, and then you have Bitcoin, all about decentralization and, like you said, individual empowerment.
You hit the nail on the head.
So,
it's a clash of philosophies, different ways of tackling these crises.
So FEMA versus Bitcoin is really centralized systems versus decentralized systems.
Precisely, yeah. And each has its own strengths and weaknesses.
So walk me through this. What are the inherent weaknesses of a centralized system like FEMA? What makes them so vulnerable, especially in a crisis?
Well, I mean, the obvious one, bureaucracy.
Right.
Layers of approvals, paperwork, procedures, all of those things create bottlenecks, slow things down when speed is often really critical.
Yeah, and we've all been stuck in those hurry up and wait situations, but in a disaster, a delay like that, that could be the difference between life or death.
Exactly. And then on top of that, you have that potential for corruption, which unfortunately we've seen happen.
Right.
When one single entity controls that much money, it can be, a recipe for disaster, especially without proper oversight.
And let's not forget about those single points of failure. If that one centralized system goes down, whether it's a cyber attack, natural disaster, or just incompetence, everything just grinds to a halt.
Yeah. Decentralized systems, on the other hand, they're way more resilient. They're distributed across a network, so there's no one single point of failure to exploit or corrupt.
That makes sense. So how does this actually play out in a disaster? Like, how is Bitcoin set up? How is it better in a real-world situation like Hurricane Helen?
Well, the video highlights how FEMA prioritized hotel rooms for federal employees instead of using those resources to house displaced families.
Oh, right. That caused a huge uproar.
And for good reason.
Yeah.
It shows that fundamental disconnect in these centralized systems.
Right.
There's this detachment from the people on the ground, a focus on internal priorities over the urgent needs of the community.
Which with Bitcoin you wouldn't have because that aid wouldn't be routed through this central authority.
Right. Donations could go directly to individuals, communities, or even those trusted local organizations that are already on the ground doing the work. No waiting for FEMA to approve and distribute funds, which we know can take weeks, even months.
Wow.
We're talking about people potentially receiving help within hours.
That's a powerful argument, that this idea of Bitcoin empowering communities to take control. But how realistic is this vision, a Bitcoin-powered future for disaster relief? That's what I'm curious about.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
And that's where we need to dig deeper. What would it actually take for this to become a reality? Okay, so we've got this picture of a future where Bitcoin, it could really transform disaster relief.
Yeah.
It could be faster, more transparent. You cut out the inefficiencies, that potential for corruption we always see with these centralized systems.
Right.
But let's get practical. Like, how would this actually work on the ground?
Well, the video lays out some pretty interesting ideas. Like, imagine that Hurricane Helen scenario.
Okay.
But this time, alongside FEMA, individuals, communities, they've got the power to take matters into their own hands, literally.
So you're talking about like people having Bitcoin wallets to get funds directly.
Right.
But how many people would need to actually be using Bitcoin for this to even work?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you still need like a certain amount of infrastructure, like widespread internet, even just technical know-how? Not everyone's a crypto whiz, right?
Those are all really important considerations. Like widespread adoption is a big one.
Yeah.
But this video is really presenting like a future vision.
Right.
Maybe having a crypto wallet becomes as commonplace as having a bank account.
Okay, so we can't let like the limitations of today completely overshadow what could be possible.
Exactly.
Right.
So let's bring it down to earth. Picture the on-the-ground impact. Think of local organizations, churches, those community groups.
Okay.
Those people are already deeply rooted in the disaster zone, right?
Yeah.
They could receive Bitcoin donations instantly, right then and there.
Okay.
Then they could use those funds, they could buy supplies, get aid to people immediately, even start rebuilding, all without wading through that bureaucratic red tape.
Like supercharged crowdfunding. But instead of going through a third-party platform, you've got this decentralized network allowing for like direct peer-to-peer aid.
Precisely, yeah. And there's another key advantage the video highlights: transparency.
Okay.
So with Bitcoin, those transactions are recorded on this public ledger. Anyone can see where the money's going. It's like this giant, transparent spreadsheet tracking every single Bitcoin transaction, viewable by anyone.
Huh.
And that just builds in a level of accountability that honestly is sorely lacking in a lot of traditional relief efforts.
Right.
Which reduces the risk of fraud or even just mismanagement.
Transparency and accountability, that's what we like to hear.
Right.
But let's play devil's advocate here for a second.
Okay.
Wouldn't there still be those logistical challenges, like converting Bitcoin to usable currency, dealing with its fluctuating value?
Yeah.
Those aren't things most people are equipped to handle, especially in the middle of a disaster.
You raise some really valid points, but solutions are already starting to pop up.
Oh, okay.
We're seeing platforms, services specifically designed to bridge that gap, making it easier to use cryptocurrency for those everyday transactions, even in those challenging environments.
So you're saying someone could like get a Bitcoin donation and then instantly convert that to local currency at like a designated relief center or something, or even just use like a crypto debit card to buy essentials.
Exactly.
Okay.
And those processes, they're only going to become more streamlined, more user-friendly as the technology matures.
Yeah.
We're still in those early stages.
It's like we're looking at this rough sketch of a revolutionary idea.
Yeah.
We need to fill in the details, work out the kinks, but that underlying concept, that potential for change, it's exciting.
It is exciting, and it's not just about efficiency and transparency. The video also argues this model, it could empower communities in ways we haven't even thought of yet.
What do you even mean by empowerment in this context?
Well, think about it. When a disaster hits, people, they often feel helpless, right? Like they're dependent on these outside forces to come and rescue them. But with this decentralized system, with Bitcoin, they're not just passively receiving aid anymore.
Right.
They're active participants in their own recovery.
They have more agency, more control over their own destinies, really.
Yes.
They could access those resources directly and just start rebuilding their lives on their own terms.
Yeah.
Instead of just waiting around for help to arrive, which who knows how long that could take.
And it shifts that power dynamic away from these big institutions to the individuals, the communities
Right.
that are most affected by the crisis.
That's a powerful idea.
It is.
And it's bigger than just disaster relief, right?
Oh, absolutely.
This whole concept of decentralization, empowering people through technology, that has so many implications.
For everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So while this video is about disaster relief, it sparks this much broader conversation about the potential of these decentralized technologies to create a more equitable, a more just world. We're not just evaluating Bitcoin. We're grappling with ideas that could reshape the very fabric of our society.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
But it's vital that we explore those potential upsides and downsides. No system is perfect.
Right. Bitcoin's not a magic bullet.
No.
So let's flip the script a bit.
Okay.
What are some of the potential downsides or even limitations of using Bitcoin for disaster relief?
Well, one concern is price volatility.
Okay.
Bitcoin's value can fluctuate a lot, even within a single day.
Yeah.
And that unpredictability is a major issue. I mean, we're talking about essential resources, life-saving aid.
Imagine you get this Bitcoin donation.
Right.
Overnight, it loses half its value.
Exactly.
That would make planning and executing relief efforts next to impossible.
Incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And while there are ways to kind of mitigate those risks, like using stable coins, which are sort of like digital dollars, they're pegged to the US dollar.
Okay.
So they're a lot less volatile. It's still something to seriously consider.
Okay, so price volatility is one hurdle. What else?
Well, despite that whole decentralized nature of Bitcoin, there are still some centralized points of failure within the ecosystem.
Okay.
Cryptocurrency exchanges, for example.
Okay.
That's where people are buying, selling, trading Bitcoin. And these exchanges have been targets of hacks, security breaches.
Right.
If an exchange goes down, it disrupts that entire flow of funds, potentially at the worst possible time.
It's like that saying, you're only as strong as your weakest link.
That's
The
it.
Bitcoin network might be secure,
Right.
but if you've got these vulnerabilities in the supporting services.
Yeah, it creates weaknesses.
Yeah, and then there's the question of scalability, right?
Right.
The Bitcoin network can only process a certain number of transactions per second.
Right.
In a typical disaster, maybe that's not a huge deal.
Yeah.
But imagine a truly catastrophic event.
Right.
Millions of people all trying to access funds at the same time.
Right. The network could get overwhelmed,
Yeah.
leading to delays, even failures.
So it seems like while Bitcoin has some definite advantages, it's not perfect.
No.
There are these real-world limitations that we would need to address for it to really work.
Absolutely.
It's about approaching this with nuance, right?
Yeah.
Seeing the potential benefits and the potential downsides.
It's not about blindly embracing Bitcoin.
Right.
It's about exploring those possibilities with a critical eye.
Right. And that's what I think makes this whole conversation so fascinating.
It is.
It's not just about Bitcoin itself.
Right.
It's about how we respond to these crises, how we get resources where they need to go, how we empower these communities.
Yeah, in this crazy world.
Yeah.
You know?
It's a lot to process,
Yeah.
but incredibly thought-provoking.
It really is.
This idea of challenging those assumptions, exploring these possibilities,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately trying to create a more just, a more equitable future. That's really what we're doing here.
I couldn't agree more. This deep dive isn't about evaluating Bitcoin in a vacuum. It's about looking at these ideas that have the potential to really reshape how we address these huge problems in the world.
And that brings us back to you.
Because at the end of the day, this isn't just some abstract thought experiment.
Right.
This is about real people facing real challenges
Yeah.
and figuring out whether these technologies can actually improve their lives.
Exactly. So here's the question we'll leave you with. Could Bitcoin really be the answer to the shortcomings we see with traditional disaster relief? Or is this just a case of, techno-optimism just going a little wild? What do you think?
It's a big question, no doubt, but that's what we do here, right? Dig into the tough stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And we really dug deep on this one.
We did. We saw how that decentralized design of Bitcoin, it could really shake up those old systems like FEMA, address some of those flaws that are kind of baked in.
It's true. Faster relief, more transparency, more equity. Hard to argue with that. Right. But let's not forget, it's not all sunshine and roses. We talked about the price swings, the technical hurdles, getting people to actually use the thing. Those are biggies.
Absolutely. But the video isn't saying Bitcoin is some kind of magic solution, right? It's more about sparking the conversation.
Exactly. Challenge the status quo. See what else is out there. Who knows? Maybe that's where the real value is. even if Bitcoin isn't the answer, just thinking about it could spark something new, a better way to do disaster response.
That's what's so cool about these emerging technologies. They make you rethink everything. Imagine what could be, and this whole decentralization thing, giving power back to the people, that's huge. Bigger than just disaster relief.
No doubt. It could change how we do everything. Aid, finance, even how we govern ourselves.
Yep. And that's where you, the listener, come in.
Yeah.
This can't just be a conversation for the techies, We
Yeah.
need everyone thinking about this, asking those tough questions.
Exactly. So here's our challenge. Don't just take our word for it. Really dig in. Bitcoin, blockchain, this idea of decentralization, what does it mean to you?
Because the future of disaster relief,
Mm.
heck, the future in general, depends on us wrapping our heads around these big ideas,
Yeah.
demanding better.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.